episode of Coffee with Kenobi is brought to you by MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. For all of your travel needs to the Disney theme parks, cruise line, or anywhere you want to go on vacation, be sure to go to our affiliate link, which can be found in the show notes on the front of our webpage or on our Twitter feed, and sign up for a free, no-obligation quote. We are also brought to you by One Nation Coffee, the official brew of Coffee with Kenobi. For the best coffee in the galaxy, go to www.onenationcoffee.com and sign up for a subscription service so you never miss out on the best coffee in the galaxy.
This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Hello and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, your spoiler-free place for Star Wars discussion, analysis, and rhetoric. This is show number 277, and I am your host, Dan Z, as always, drinking One Nation coffee out of my all-new Celebration Chicago coffee mug. I did it. I got the black one with the porg on the inside of it. What a fun sentence to say. And I got a number of mugs at Star Wars Celebration Chicago, which I will, of course, be using over the next couple of weeks as I bring you our weekly podcast. It's going to be a great show today as we talk with Drew Taylor about his history covering Star Wars, the current state of the franchise, and much more. Now, you're going to notice a slight shift in the presentation of the show. I really liked how the Road to Celebration shows came out and the feedback I got on them, so we'll try to match that tone going forward.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Joining me today for a cup of coffee is one of my peers, actually, from the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. You know him, you love him, Mr. Drew Taylor.
I say we're peers. I always say we're fast friends. I'm going to say that right off the bat.
There you go.
Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. Yeah, right off the bat. As soon as I saw you come waltzing into our Covering Star Wars panel, I knew this is one of my boys right here.
Yeah, you knew I was going to give Bresnikan some lip, and you loved it.
I did love it. And judging on the downloads, a lot of people loved it too, man.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it was great to me, and of course people listening to the show know that we had a lot of panels that we did at Star Wars Celebration Chicago, but the first one we did was covering Star Wars. Jim Hill was originally on the docket for it, and he had some family things come up, and the first person I thought of right away was Drew, because I knew Drew, of course, through Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, and then, of course, his excellent podcast, Light the Fuse. And then we just kind of been joking around on Twitter. And then I thought, now that I've met this guy and we're buddies, I got to have on Coffee with Kenobi.
I'm thrilled to be here. Let me tell you, I don't have coffee. I have a giant swell bottle full of water. I hope that's okay. I hope I'm not breaking any rules.
No, you're allowed.
Okay.
You're allowed.
Okay.
You're Drew Taylor.
Do you have
you're
coffee?
allowed.
Are you drinking coffee this late at night?
Sometimes I do. Yeah, nothing really keeps me awake. Like because I don't get a lot of sleep because of the different things I do. When it's sleep time, I'm out.
You're out. Okay.
Yeah.
I just worry about you.
Fair, you and my mother.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so hey, let's jump right in. Let's talk about your history with Star Wars, and as a fan, I actually don't know this.
Well, I am a pretty big Star Wars fan. I mean, I grew up in the kind of dark time. I was born in '83. So a month or so before Return of the Jedi came out. So that was my sort of first exposure just because it was on television so much. So I grew up in the kind of like the in-between era where you would hear something about Star Wars coming back and it was never fulfilled. And then the special editions came out, which I remember being a huge deal. Oh, yeah. And I saw all of those theatrically, which of course led into The Phantom Menace, which I saw in Austin, Texas in 1999. And waited outside the theater all day for that. And, that was kind of an interesting coming of age because I was right at the time where I was like, 1999 was the most probably amazing year of movies ever. And this movie was supposed to be the kind of like the high point. Didn't work out quite the same, but I still was very diligently, in love with the movies and, was actually working at Disney when they came back in 2015 with The Force Awakens, which was a really interesting experience. And I'll get into some funny stories in a little bit that I didn't tell on the podcast, probably because on the panel because Bresnikan was talking. But I'll get into some funny things of like sort of dealing with Disney and working professionally on Star Wars while also being a part of the company that's putting them out.
Cool.
But yeah, I really love where Star Wars is today. And my fandom is definitely up there, and it's been fun to be able to cover the movies. And I think we talked a little bit at Celebration about how much I love Star Wars: The Last Jedi, and think that is kind of like an amazing.
It's a masterpiece.
It's a masterpiece. It's an artistic statement. It's a profound work of art, I think, and I am so happy that it happens to be like, a part of the Star Wars franchise that makes billions of dollars, and it's just this amazing, inspirational, achievement. So that's really exciting to me, and I think we're in a kind of golden age of Star Wars. I don't know how you feel about it. You have to cover every aspect of Star Wars. I can kind of pick and choose, but
right.
It feels like kind of a golden age of Star Wars.
It's something of a renaissance because we've got so many things to choose from, but the canonical weight that goes into this, I mean, there's certainly some picking and choosing that even I do, but I just think there's so much enriching material. I mean, just today that they were recording the audiobook Dooku Jedi Lost by Kevin Scott came out, which talks about Dooku's history with the Jedi and in coming into the Order and becoming Yoda's Padawan, and why does Yoda even have a Padawan? And then him getting Qui-Gon and his first kind of steps into the dark side of the Force. And I'm telling you, it's fascinating. When Star Wars is done right, much like a good Batman comic book or a Marvel Cinematic Universe story, when it's done right, the sky's the limit because you can just go a lot of places in this amazing mythology.
Now, how many people were actually clamoring for a Count Dooku book?
Well, I know what you're saying. I always kind of intrigued by him because of Christopher Lee.
I know. I love Christopher Lee. That was a big thrill to see him up there.
It's great.
It's sad that there aren't any kind of Hammer guys to be in these new movies because they're all gone, sadly. But I love that kind of continuity of like Cushing to Christopher Lee was so great.
It's great. Well, I can legitimately say that Dooku book is still, because it's created. It's actually just an audiobook. There's no text of it.
Oh, is it like
it's a radio drama? Yeah.
Oh, really? So it's is it like a podcast or is it one thing?
It's just it's a download, with a bunch of different tracks on it.
Oh, wow. Well, that actually makes me excited.
No, it's fantastic.
We were talking before the show about the Star Wars Clone Wars, the Genndy Tartakovsky series, and there was so much great Dooku stuff in there, as well. I just love that.
No, I agree. Yeah. So you said Last Jedi, of course, and I agree. I think Last Jedi is like a wonderful commentary, kind of a meta commentary on what it means to be a hero and a lot of other things. But so how do you have a thing where you can rank the Star Wars movies from your favorite to your least?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Empire and Last Jedi are like my favorites. Maybe they're like battling it out for number one.
Same with me, actually.
Yeah, really? Okay, great. Yeah, and then the Return of the Jedi I loved. Obviously, that was my first exposure as a child, and the prequels I generally think are pretty terrible, and I know that you've kind of found some interesting kind of inroads to them.
I have,
and I think from a design standpoint, there's a lot to really love, and I think that is the one thing you can say like against Force Awakens, which is like this is the same ships, it's the same everything. In the prequels, everything was so crazy and so different and so wildly designed that I love that. I love the aesthetic of it. But I just think the story is kind of stupid and unnecessary.
So how do you really feel? See, this is why we had Drew on the panel. We knew he'd be honest.
Well, am I not supposed to say that? I could be. Okay.
Please do.
I didn't want to offend anybody. No. But and then I love Rogue One. I think Rogue One is like really wonderful. And I've become kind of friendly with Christopher McQuarrie, who did some work on Rogue One.
Oh wow!
Through my other podcast, and he's told me some interesting things about that. And the only newer one I'm not super crazy about is Solo. And I know that you like. I will say that Solo plays better on TV. I watched it on home video, and I was like, okay, this is a fine episode of the Solo TV show. It's like
sure. I can see that. I like you watching on home video. What was it on your Betamax?
It was on my Betamax. I dusted off the Betamax, threw it on. That Solo is sort of like such an interesting story. And as a journalist, I feel like the story of some of these movies aren't going to be totally told until like 10 years later. Like maybe we'll finally get that Rensler book on Force Awakens, which was deemed too kind of provocative, and they canceled it.
Yeah, I hope we do. I mean, do you have any insights into what happened there?
What I understand is that he just he told the truth about what happened and who was involved, and the various permutations that movie went through. And they were like, this is just kind of like a little too real. Yeah. So they fired him. They brought, took the book back, and yeah. So like when we get the story of Rogue One, or we get the story of Solo, and like what actually went down behind the scenes, I think it's going to be amazing. And I actually have a really good Star Trek connection that we're about to reveal in one of our episodes of Light the Fuse, because we did an interview with Barney Berman, who told us an amazing anecdote that I don't think anybody has heard, and I'll tell you after the episode because it hasn't aired yet, so I don't want to step on our toes. But
sure.
I think these things are going to come out a little bit more and more, and I think that's going to be really interesting. And I want to know how far Brad Bird got in the process of kind of devising Force Awakens, and what happened with the original writer of Force Awakens, and all these things. It seems like the best ideas have outed, and they've kind of like gotten this product out. What actually happened on some of these movies?
Because you had, I mean, we'll talk about this at the end, but you've spoken with Brad Bird at length.
Yeah. I mean, and I will say that the official narrative of J.J. Abrams was the first director we ever went to for this movie, and the only director we ever went to this movie is categorically untrue. I can say that Brad was offered the movie first. He was going to do this really interesting thing where he was going to have Colin Trevorrow set up pre-production while he shot Tomorrowland. He was going to shoot the Star Wars movie, and then Colin Trevorrow was going to help with post-production on one or both of the movies. It sounded like a very interesting setup, and it's even more interesting now that Trevorrow has been fired.
Thank goodness.
From his movie, obviously. Yeah, I think that was a very good choice.
Yeah, nothing against him and his family earning money, of course not, but I just was not a fan of the new Jurassic Park movies, and I just thought, I do not want these fingerprints on Star Wars.
Well, if you're really feeling down one night, you can watch his movie Book of Henry, which is one of the worst movies I have ever seen. I remember seeing it very early, and they kind of just like swore me to silence because I think the studio knew how bad it is literally one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Well, with an endorsement like that, I think I'll just stop this recording now and go check it out.
Just go watch Book of Henry. Come back in a couple hours.
Sure.
It's awful. But so yeah, it's really interesting, and it was interesting being at Disney during The Force Awakens, and not only being at Disney when Force Awakens was coming out, but also them being more aggressive about introducing Star Wars into the parks. I was there the first year of the Season of the Force, which of course we all know and love.
I do.
And adding those new scenes into Star Tours.
Mm-hmm.
Which
that was where I first met Jim.
Oh, really? At the Star Tours event? Oh, in Florida, right?
In Florida when they did the one for Last Jedi.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Which is great, and I love it on the DVD or on the Blu-ray that he talks about the scene in The Last Jedi being inspired by the original Star Tours and the comet sequence from that.
That's right.
Ride.
That's right.
But I remember did you ever ride Hyperspace Mountain, Dan, at Disneyland?
I did. When I filmed the Target commercial, I had a day off, and so I went to Disneyland. And I'm not a big roller coaster guy, at least I used to be. And then I reached an age where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm old. I don't like this anymore.
Right.
But I forced myself, pun intended, to do it because it was Star Wars, and I loved it.
Yeah, it was great, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down with Scott Trowbridge because my office was right next to Imagineering. So I went and had lunch with Scott, and I got him to tell me this whole thing about when the Hyperspace Mountain events took place in the Star Wars canon, and it was during the Battle of Jakku, which is, where the debris was left on Jakku at the beginning of Star. And then, so I put this out, and everything that I wrote about Star Wars, I had to filter through the Star Wars group. I mean, this was not, people weren't in
story group,
not the story group yet, but it was like people who are now in the story group were reading my stuff then.
Wow.
And then I got this call, and it was like, you can't use any of this. And it's like, no, he's on record. This is canon. This is when the hyperspace mountain scenario took place, and they were like, you can't use it. And the same thing happened to me there's a star speeder in The Force Awakens. I don't know if you've ever noticed this.
Where?
There's a scene where Rey is coming back to the kind of like village, and there's that creature with like kind of the robotic arms that's dragging trash. Yeah. And in the background, you can see a star speeder take off.
Really?
And I noticed it on the Blu-ray, and I said, please let me have this be an exclusive. Like, it's there. And so I pitched all this stuff to Lucasfilm, like, let's do an exclusive. We'll talk to the visual effects guys that put it in there, whatever. And then I get this very stern call from someone who is still a dear friend, so I won't name them, but they just said, JJ didn't know that was there. So we cannot acknowledge that this is real. But it's there. I will tell you it's there, but we as a company cannot go out and say, yes, there's a star speeder in The Force Awakens.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah. So those are some kind of fun stories about what it's like working within the machine, getting great content, and then not getting to share it with anybody. But now I've shared it with all the Coffee with Kenobi listeners. So
that's right.
You guys all know. So now it's out. It's out there.
So now it's official. Now it's
now it's
canon.
Yeah,
canon.
Yeah. Now I don't want it to be in Legends, and I don't want it to be wherever Gendy's stuff is, whatever trash.
No Tartakovsky stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so you mentioned how you were with Disney. At some point, you went from working in the Disney corporation to covering, because of course you are the managing editor of Moviefone, in addition to the host of Life Diffused. So kind of talk about the transition there, and give us some sort of. I mean, gosh, I could sit here and listen to you talk for hours, but
God.
But
ask my fiance how that is. It's
probably some of what my wife would say about my stories. Today, kind of take us through some highlights of just sort of how that transition happened for you. Well, was it hard to make that jump?
No, it wasn't. It was, I always said that, like, I would only kind of like cross the aisle for Disney, because I was a journalist before. I'd been working since 2007 and done stuff for pretty much every outlet you can imagine, Vanity Fair, MTV, the Playlist, all these, Time Out New York. But then I have a great friend named Dustin Sandoval who works in digital marketing at Disney. And he said, you just got to come out here, you got to come out and you got to just be a part of it. And this really interesting job opened up at Disney where I was running a website on Disney.com, and they paid for me to move out here. And I was in Connecticut before. And so it just seemed like a great opportunity. And then after a couple of years, my site kind of went away. It got absorbed into Oh My Disney, which is, I mean, most people will know from the scene in Wreck-It Ralph with the princesses, but,
yes.
So, and then it was sort of like, well, that's not really like what I came to Disney to do these like crazy deep dive, articles about the history of the company, some unseen aspects of the company. Still, one of my favorite things I ever did was I interviewed Leonard Maltin about this weird Dick Tracy thing he did with Warren Beatty in 2010, like long after the movie, things like that.
That's quite cool. Leonard Maltin, he's legend.
Great. He is a legend, and he was very, very generous with his time and talking about this incredibly stupid thing that he did that I was only.
For some reason, when you call something stupid, it makes me very happy.
Yeah, I think if you look up this video, you'll be delighted. But so then I just kind of just segued out and went back, and what's great is there was no hard feelings or anything. I still cover, as you know, a lot of Disney things, and so it was pretty easy out. I mean, I was always sort of connected with that world, and I would do freelance stuff every once in a while. But
did Moviefone come to you, or how'd that happen?
Well, I actually I had done some stuff for Moviefone back in 2012, and then they offered me a full-time job at the same time that Disney did, and I had to take the Disney job. So when I left Disney, I was like, it was sort of like I'm back on the market. And so I've been doing stuff with them for a while, and now I'm the managing editor, and we've got some really exciting things coming up. But it's great. I get to cover Disney, and then if another job opens up, that sounds great. That is somewhere in that sort of curatorial, historical realm, then I would jump back and say, "See you guys later. I've done enough stuff. I've told you, I've been to a James Bond set. I've been to a Guardians of the Galaxy and an Avengers set. I've been to all these premieres. I'm kind of like content with it. I think we talked a little bit about this during the panel too. Is like, you've got to be sort of like content with all aspects of your life and all aspects of, if certain aspects go away and come back, you have to be content with that too. So I'm really happy where I am, and look forward to everything that's going to come down the pike.
You've had amazing experiences. You've made sure to live them to the fullest, and you've made sure to prepare yourself so that when opportunities come, you're ready to seize them and just put your own spin on it, which I think is absolutely the way to attack life. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk more with Drew about different premiere stories and events that he's had, and then we're going to look at the current state of the franchise and how it stacks up to what's going on in the world of Marvel. This is Coffee with Kenobi.
Greetings. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Our Patreon family has just grown and grown, and here are a list of our Patreon contributors: Jason Hall, Rebecca Raven, Dennis Keithley, Alexander Moylan, Terry Lee, Ben Elkington, Melinda Wolf, Aaron Harris, Chris Gavarka, Angela Sauce, Mediocre Jedi, Jeffrey Hoban, Kurt McKellen, Yancey Evans, Dan Ream, Colby Mead, Brian Harding, Blake Weaver, Chris Ham, Amy Mulder, Jim Capron, Caroline Maselli, Chris Metz, LJ Souter, Thea Selby, Jeff Ellis, Daz Davies, Christian Dale, Brian McKinney, Connie Shee, Jared Cantor, BJ Smith, Eric Struthers, Nick Tico, and Mark Suter. All of these people have contributed to our CWK Patreon page. They are members of our Coffee with Kenobi family, and we cannot thank you enough for what you do for our show. You allow us to add to our travel budget, to the equipment, to the money and cost that it takes to put on a top quality podcast that we've been bringing to you each and every week. And you get something out of it as well. You get access to CWK Prover, which is our show you can hear for $5 or more a month. It's a weekly show. We talk about Star Wars and all kinds of popular culture topics, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. This week we gave part 1 of our Avengers Endgame review and had a great time doing that. Boy, that's a pretty heavy movie too, a lot to unpack. And we're just getting started. We certainly hope that you will join us each and every week on CWK Prover. And again, go to www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi and sign up for $5 or more a month, and you can get access to that as well. If you have any questions, just reach out and let me know. danz@coffeewithkenobi.com. I mentioned MEI and Mouse Fan Travel at the top of the show. Look, this is the time when you need to find a good travel agent because Galaxy's Edge is opening very, very soon. It's very exciting. It's also very confusing and a little bit uncertain. So you need to have people who really know what they're doing and can take care of things for you so you can just go and enjoy the Millennium Falcon, all the great things that Bat 2 is going to offer. MEI and Mouse Fan Travel is the agency that we use at Coffee with Kenobi. The signature service and extra advice that they have helps clients maximize vacation time and dollar. And this is the big part about it. There's a no cost, no obligation quote expectation when you use the service. And they also proactively adjust a booking if the rate goes down. So it's free. They're going to help your family enjoy everything the Disney theme parks and the cruise lines have to offer, plan every detail, and share invaluable tips. Be sure to go to our affiliate link, which can be found in the show notes on the front of our webpage or on our Twitter feed, and sign up for a free, no-obligation quote. We are back, and Drew, of course,
Thank
is with
God.
us.
Thank God we're back.
It was such a long wait.
That was too long. My heart was...
Palpitations? Something like that.
Back.
It's okay. You noticed when he, ladies and gentlemen, when he said, my heart wasn't, he didn't talk for a while, I thought it suddenly was serious.
I know.
All right, so you've been on, you said have you been on a Star Wars set before?
No, nobody's ever been on a Star Wars set.
Not even Bresnik can?
No, you know, right, you're right.
Brett
Bresnikan has
Leibowitz?
been, yes. No,
Yeah.
Bresnikan has, because I
And
think he did the
Leibowitz.
interviews on the set. Yeah, and I'm sure Leibowitz is always there. It's so funny. Isn't it funny that they sort of follow the same playbook for every movie? And for some reason, one of those things is, Annie Leibovitz, glossy photos in a issue of Vanity Fair. Cool. Let's keep doing it. You know what? They're all online like seconds later, but it's just such a weird like part of the cycle. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think George really liked her work, and I think that was just sort of the gateway for that.
Yeah, and she's done a lot of stuff for Disney too.
Oh,
remember those ads with different movie stars, those different characters?
Those were fun. I loved them.
Yeah, they were great. Yeah.
That was a pop culture phenomenon, I think. Just the way that they blended that sort of stuff. Tell us some highlights about what is it like? I mean, we certainly talked on the show a lot about interviewing people, but you've interviewed some mega talent over the years. You've actually got a great story of shaking George Lucas's hand, which I'd like you to share again.
Yes. Yes. So this was at D23, and when I was at Disney, I had this badge, Dan. Let me tell you, I could have gone up to Alan Horn and kissed him on the cheek. I could go anywhere, and I was in the green room behind the main stage at D23, and so I'm back there doing something stupid, I'm sure, and I see George Lucas alone, and I just kind of went up to him and said, you've meant so much to me. And this was, I think, when he was inducted as like a Disney legend a few years ago. So this one, and I shook his hand, and then I sort of like had that like Ratatouille flashback moment to a friend of mine who had encountered him at USC and told me, oh, he's a germ freak, so you don't shake his hands. And then I come back to my present day self and watch him immediately walk into the bathroom and wash his hands. And I said, well, you know what? Listen, I was still happy to say hello to him, and it was a great moment for me. Yeah, for sure. I'm sure he was thrilled too that some sweaty doofus came up and shook his hand
in the best way possible.
So,
I mean, I know, like, I remember the first time I ever interviewed someone. I mean, we interviewed Ian Desher, which was wonderful, and John Jackson Miller, both great authors and great guys. But the first person that was actually in Star Wars, whether it's animation or film, that was James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And the first time,
now become kind of a buddy of yours, right?
Yeah,
he
very
came
much
on your show.
Yeah, he came on the show. He brought Kat Tabor with him. It was pretty awesome. And the first time I was just like so excited, nervous, and my stomach was hurting. And I don't get nervous about anything. I mean, I could talk in front of millions of people. It wouldn't bother me in the least because I'd like attention, quite honestly. Plus, it's fun, So you undoubtedly, what was your very first interview like in the Star Wars universe? So what was your nerve level like? And then, of course, now it's just like normal stuff.
Yeah, I remember for Force Awakens, I talked to Boyega, Julie Christie, Daisy Ridley, and John Kasdan, which was really cool.
Yeah.
And
I
not John Kasdan, Lawrence Kasdan. Lawrence Kasdan. Yeah. Yes, Lawrence Kasdan. The good Kasdan. And that was that. I think there was less pressure besides Lawrence Kasdan, which I walked in the room and said, big Dreamcatcher fan, and he goes, "You're the one," and I thought that was a good,
that's a good start.
That was good, breaking the ice. Yeah, but there wasn't quite as much pressure because, well, two things: they were new cast members, right? And then there was the fact that I did the junket without seeing the movie, and that was really crazy because you were sort of fishing around for questions. I mean, it was a really weird scenario, but I loved doing the interviews. They were also grateful and kind of excited about things. And it was cool because at that time I was at Disney. And so I was kind of hanging around and going to all these different events with them. And, went to the YouTube Space event with all of them. And Kathy Kennedy was there. And, as just being in a room with her, you kind of feel that kind of importance and that power, which is really wonderful. And
she's the real deal.
And I got to do things. She is, and one of my favorite stories I got out of that period was the story of Ample Hills, which I don't know if you ever had the ice cream that they put out for Force Awakens.
No,
but it's a tiny little ice cream joint in Brooklyn. There were two or three locations at the time. And Bob Iger came in and tried the ice cream and loved it, and ended up being like a huge contributor to them building a bigger like facility. And then the second Ample Hills outside of New York was in Walt Disney World, and they had the ice cream license for Force Awakens. And it was just a wonderful little story of like this little company that was sort of, you know, shepherded through by Bob Iger and became a small but incredibly delicious part of this story. And they recently did some ice cream for Mickey's 90th, and there's now a location here in Los Angeles. And so it's just, if the ice cream, especially if that ice cream is still around, they had like a light side and a dark side. They sent me some, and it was absolutely wonderful. But it's a really fun story, and I remember that being a really fun thing that I got out of the Force Awakens cycle. But yeah, and I mean, going to that premiere was really wonderful. You weren't at that premiere, right?
No, the only premiere I've been to so far is Solo.
Okay.
That's where I met George, and I actually talked to Bob Iger for like 10 minutes too.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was my first entry. But I don't know if I wasn't nervous, but it was more like I couldn't be, because it was just like
There's no
you were sort of trying to you were trying to figure out information. It was weird. And that was sort of like, I just did the Endgame junket a few weeks ago, which you heard a little bit of.
Yeah. But that was
another thing.
Look, I'm not just saying this because you're on the show and you're a friend of mine, but your chemistry and your ability to just talk to these creators like they are just college buddies and just kind of break it down, but in your own style, I think is brilliant. Kudos to you for that.
I think that's where me being a dummy comes in, and I just don't know any better to be nervous around them.
Take the compliment.
All right, I'm taking it.
Okay, so surely who was the first person you interviewed where you thought, wow, this is a big deal? What was that like?
I remember doing an interview with Ryan Gosling for Blue Valentine, which this is years and years ago. But that was like the first sort of like star of that caliber. And I was just like, oh shit, like this is going to go. I was really nervous. And then, you know, he ended up being kind of a goof, which I love. And, you know, I think that you have to go into it being completely prepared. And I don't do a lot of on-camera stuff, but when I do it, that's when I really like to get funny. And, you know, I'll send you this video I did with Chris Evans from a couple years ago, where I played a game with him called Shield or Shield, where I was asking him questions, and the only answers were Shield as in his shield, or Shield as in the International Peacekeeping Organization Shield. So, and he was wonderful. He was wonderful. So, yeah,
he's my favorite. I actually, Captain America or Captain Marvel are my favorite Avengers, so it's kind of cool.
He's pretty great. He's pretty great.
So let's talk about kind of the state of our Star Wars franchise and Marvel. And the reason this is coming up is, of course, doing what I do and being an educator, especially over the past week, as you can imagine, people keep coming up to me saying, gosh, do you think that Episode 9 will be anywhere near as popular as Endgame? Is this more popular than Star Wars now? And I mean, my immediate response is, I don't know that anything's going to eclipse Endgame for a while, including Episode 9. I could be wrong. It'd be nice if it was wrong, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's still going to be a movie that we're going to enjoy, and it's going to add to the saga and bookend this thing that's been going on since 1977. But I do think it's an interesting conversation. Kind of, where do you stand on all that?
Well, we have to kind of break it down in a couple ways, because the first thing is like there's never been anything quite like the MCU in terms of the volume.
11 years without a misstep.
11 years without a misstep. We'll give those points to Thor: The Dark World, I guess. Now that it's been reintegrated into the franchise.
That, even it's like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's better than anything else.
Right, that's true. But we haven't had a series of films that sort of encapsulate different franchises that are released with this regularity, where each one builds to the next. Such a short period of time. I mean, we'll have almost 9 movies. Yeah, but we'll have 9 Star Wars movies after 40 something years, 45 years.
Yeah, we're at 10 right now.
10 right now. Okay, so like canonically, and then you have the Star Wars stories, but it hasn't built like this, and it hasn't been building a single narrative because each trilogy is its own thing, and we have the standalone stories, and so I don't know if there's a precedent. There hasn't really been anything like the MCU, and
No.
what I think will be interesting from a storytelling point of view is what I found so sort of affecting about Endgame was how sort of nakedly emotional it was and how heartfelt it was, and for all the spectacle and the time travel and all this, that it came down to telling a conclusive story to characters who you love and setting some of them off on different paths. And the sort of start and stop nature of the Star Wars movies kind of prevents that kind of culmination to happen, I feel like. But with this Palpatine stuff, feels like, and I've heard this from people who are working on the films, and not even people who are working on the films, but people who have had contact with people who know things way above my pay grade, but that it really is going to be a culmination of all the movies and not just these. What do you call it? What are these? The sequel trilogy? Is that?
I think that's pretty much the official. Yeah.
So, yeah, people who have deeper hooks into this thing have said there's a lot of prequel stuff, which doesn't make me super thrilled, but I mean, keeps you happy, Dan.
It makes me happy because what the prequels added to the mythology are quite great. I mean, there's a lot of, some of the
midi-chlorians, Dan. That's what you want, midi-chlorians.
You know what? I could actually tell you why I like. This is the thing. Midi-chlorians is something that I was bothered by, and then I did what I do when I'm teaching. If I want to know about something, I got to write about it or I got to teach it. So I contacted Insider, Star Wars Insider, and I said, I'm going to do an expose on midichlorians and try to figure them out and make peace with them. They said, go for it. So I did, and I found some really cool stuff about it, even way back from the beginning with Rensler, actually, of all people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll have to send that to you. But it's
I
can actually have a newer respect for it than I ever had before. But the things they did with just sort of the Jedi, the Sith, the breakdown of the galaxy, the machinations of our buddy Palpatine made it pretty fascinating. Now, the dialogue wasn't great.
Trade embargoes.
Well,
all the things that children love. Trade embargoes.
That's right.
Underwater cities. What else did the prequels give us? Giant lizards running around.
Yeah, But you gotta love General Grievous.
Love General Grievous. Looking for his Black Series. If you come across it, Dan, please put it in the mail to me.
I will.
Yeah, I like I said, I think the designs and stuff from the prequels were really pretty staggering. Yeah. What a cool guy. Have you had him on the show yet?
I have not had him on the show. We've chatted a few times in passing, but never had him on the show.
What a brilliant mind. And when I was at Disney, I was so fascinated with it. He was going to do that Yellow Submarine movie.
Oh, was he really?
With Robert Zemeckis. Yeah, it was a mocap remake of Yellow Submarine, and I've been really fascinated by that. But yeah, I mean, Disney will probably have the 2 or 3 biggest movies of the year, regardless of what Star Wars does, between Lion King and Star Wars and Toy Story 4 and Marvel. So all of our dollars are going in one direction. It's all getting vacuumed up by the.
That's right. They'll be able to open more ice cream shops.
Yeah, God, you got to get this ice cream. Let me tell you, it is good. It is really good.
Well, maybe in a few weeks I'll get that chance.
Yeah. If you stay out a little extra, I don't know if your work will permit it, but we'll go get some ice cream.
All right, I love it. Well, hey, real quick before we let you go, what do you think is the major reason why Solo didn't take off? Do you think it was released too closely to The Last Jedi? Because as we said, Marvel releases movies sometimes a month apart, and that doesn't seem to affect them at all.
But it's interesting because I was talking with Jim about this too, in terms of the live action Disney remakes, because we have Aladdin coming out on May 24th, which is pretty close to Dumbo, which just came out in
They
March.
Shouldn't put anything close to Endgame because that's pretty much the juggernaut.
It's the juggernaut, but listen, these movies gotta come out. But it's like the movies build so well on one another, and you have to see the next one. It is sort of like giant budget television in the sense that you have to watch the next episode or you're going to be left out, and you're also going to be left out of this cultural conversation. And the Star Wars movies, especially if you throw in those stories, they don't really do that. And neither do the animated live action adaptations. They're just sort of their own thing. There's no sort of momentum that's built. And I don't know what happened with Solo exactly, and I haven't really gotten any kind of confirmation from anybody, but I feel like the loss of a Lord and Miller version is a real detriment to the Star Wars canon. And I don't necessarily think that their version would have made more money. Maybe it would have been just as much of a flop, but it would have been more.
You think it was a flop?
I think it was, let's say, a dud. And I don't know if that's box office wise or critically or just sort of in passing, because there are some very strong supporters of that movie.
Do you know? I don't really know anybody who doesn't like the movie. I certainly know the box office pundits and all that, but I don't know anyone who said, "Oh, I just don't like this." Usually people say it's fun.
Worldwide, it made $392 million,
which is not great.
Not great, with a production budget of $275, and that's not fessing up to how much the reshoots cost and the promotion and building that ridiculous Solo, like full scale Solo. Yeah, I mean Millennium Falcon that they had at the junket and all that.
Oh, that was the best.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Were you there at the junket?
I was at the junket. Yeah.
Oh, me too.
What could have been, Dan? We could have started this romance so much earlier.
We could have had ice cream then.
We could have had ice cream then.
I was actually the last person to ask a question at the junket.
At the press conference?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, I was in the room with you.
The room where it happened.
Yeah. But I just wish that there, like, I wish there was that kind of like artistic freedom. This is what I've kind of discovered about Star Wars, and I think that this is something that has made its way through the sort of production process on some of these things. Is that you and I and Genndy Tartakovsky and Lord and Miller might have very different views of what a Star Wars movie can be. Maybe it's a wacky comedy. Maybe it's this crazy animated thing. But that the people that are running the Star Wars machine see Star Wars as pretty much one thing. That there's got to be some kind of space battle at the end, that the characters really have to be defined in black and white, that tonally there's a very specific vibe that goes into the movies that are sort of essentially Star Wars as these sort of forces think of them as. And that's the interesting thing, is that all these conflicts with artists and people getting fired and things like that seem to be that sort of thing. It's like there's a view of Star Wars that these people have, and there's a view of Star Wars that the Lucasfilm sort of core has. And if those views are opposed, then the Lucasfilm view will out. And I think that works sometimes. I think that Rogue One was great. I think that was a great example of them kind of like taking the bull by the horns and kind of, massaging that thing into something that people really loved. And then there's Solo, which is sort of like neither fish nor fowl, and kind of got tripped up in that process and ended up being something that wasn't quite as sound creatively as it could have been had they just left it to the creators' sort of vision.
Interesting. Because I think, I don't know what your thoughts were on Alden Ehrenreich. I thought he was pretty great. I mean, he actually made me forget about Harrison Ford, which is an accomplishment.
Yeah, the cast was wonderful. I think that people that say that it should have been a Lando movie, or at least from Lando's perspective, maybe, I think there's some merit to that. I think the problem with Solo, and this is something that goes back to Batman Begins and the kind of like origin story stuff, is like, do we really need to know where his blaster came from? Do we really need to know that some Imperial guard called him Solo at some dumb checkpoint? Like, the life death that Chewie owed him. Like, couldn't Chewie have gotten out of that hole himself? It's
and the
like
life debt pretty much went away.
And it went away, and it seemed to like sort of come back when they're on that mining planet. I mean, it's just like, it's sort of like the problem with the prequels, and you can talk to this since you're more engaged in the kind of like fan community, but it's like, I could have come up with a cooler story about how Darth Vader became Darth Vader, and you don't need all this backstory. And I feel like it feels like these movies are kind of like Wikipedia articles come to life, and the people that bitch about Snoke not having enough backstory, it's like you bitch about Snoke not having enough backstory. then 6 months later you get Solo, which is a Wikipedia article, and you're not happy with either of them. So pick something. Like the world of Star Wars always had so much mystery as a child too, because we didn't have all that other stuff.
I like
and
the
that's
ambiguity
kind of what I love.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, and I think that's what Ryan's movie did, was bring that mystery back to Star Wars, and also bring this idea that the Force is sort of a democratic entity that anybody can tap into, which I thought was so powerful. And after years of it being Sith and Jedi and whatever else, it was sort of like, no, you can kind of like tap into this and be your own Jedi and have a wonderful podcast called Coffee with Kenobi. You can do that too. Any of you little children on a casino
small
planet
desert moon
can do that too. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, hey man, this wouldn't even scratch the surface of some of the things we could talk about. So we'll definitely have to have you on.
I'm coming back once a month. Okay.
Once a month.
Once a month.
Well, there you go.
I don't know what your release schedule is like, but every Thursday you're just gonna get some off the cuff Taylor antics. So whether you like it or not, I'm coming back. Yeah.
Well, good. We'll have to put you in touch with my assistant and see what happens.
Yes. And I'll see you soon enough. We can't say why or where.
That's right.
Or what distant part of the galaxy, but we'll see each other soon. Somewhere
exciting. So before we let you go, let everybody know where they can find you and reach out if they want to ask you.
Reach out. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and everything else as Drew Tailored, like Tailored. And then please listen to Light the Fuse. Do you think that's a good pun? As an English teacher, is that a pretty good pun?
It's solid. I'll give it about a B+, yeah.
All right, good. Whew, skating by an old Mr. Z's class. But please listen to Light the Fuse. I'm just going to go. I'm going to spoil something that's coming up. And I think you're going to love this, Dan. I
can't wait.
In a few weeks, we're going to have a multi-part interview with none other than Paul Hirsch.
Wow.
So we are going to get, we talk about Star Wars. I mean, we obviously talk about the first and fourth Mission Impossibles, which he edited, Brian De Palma and Brad Birds. But we talk about Star Wars. We talk about editing in general. We talk about, it's an amazing conversation. He's an amazing person. And we were so thrilled. We just went to his house one day and sat down and chatted with Paul Hirsch, who is genuinely a living legend. And so I hope that's some intrigue to get you guys involved. And we have a lot of also some fun people coming up. But we have episodes with Brad Bird and Christopher McQuarrie and, a bunch of great creative people that have worked on these movies. And I hope if you enjoy Mission Impossible even a fraction as much as you enjoy Star Wars, you'll get a kick out of this series.
Yeah, Light the Fuse is the real deal, everybody. It's an amazing show. Obviously, you've heard Drew here, and then, of course, on Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, which you and Jim do that. You guys do that every week, right? Because
we do it every week.
Or every other week for looking at
Yeah, I talk to Jim more than many members of my family. I get in about as many words edgewise as them as well. So, it's a wonderful relationship. No, I love Jim, and I hope I filled his shoes well in Chicago.
You did. I take back all the things I said about you. Yeah, you did. No, for sure. Hey, dude, thank you so much for coming on Coffee with Kenobi. Can't wait to talk with you again.
Anytime, Dad.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are the podcast you're looking for. This is
A big thank you to Drew Taylor for joining us this week on Coffee with Kenobi. And I also want to thank our CWK sponsors, One Nation Coffee and Mouse Fan Travel. Please support them the way they support our podcast, and remember to listen to new and archive shows of Coffee with Kenobi wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, where you can find the audio as well as some occasional videos, and of course our website, www.coffeewithkenobi.com, or wherever you enjoy listening to your favorite shows. And if you listen to the show through iTunes, please leave us a review. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, and we'd love for you to check us out there. Be sure to listen to our CWK family of shows too, including Legends Library, Resistance Reactions, Comics with Kenobi, and Lattes with Leia. Please leave a review for each of their shows as well. Be sure to subscribe to each of them individually, as they all have their own feeds on iTunes. In addition to the places I just mentioned for Coffee with Kenobi, you can find me twice a month on the podcast Looking at Lucasfilm, part of the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, which we've talked about earlier on the show with Drew. You can also find me individually on Twitter at Mr. Zer, M-R-Z-E-H-R, and you can find my writing on CWK's website as well as StarWars.com, where I actually just interviewed Blaine Hardy, who is a relief pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. They're having a May the 4th game in Detroit with the BB-8 beanie giveaway, and it's a really cool thing. He's a fun guy. Had a great time chatting with him, so thanks to StarWars.com for having me do that. And you can also find my writing on IGN, where I can talk about Star Wars as well as any other pop culture topics. Be sure to check out www.patreon.com/coffeewithkenobi to help support this show, as well as get access to podcasts like CWK Pour Over, which cannot be heard anywhere else. There are also t-shirts, coffee mugs, and so much more. Thank you so much for taking time out of your week to join me. I hope you have a wonderful week and a weekend, that you make sure to continue to build up this wonderful Star Wars community that we have. Until next time, this is the podcast you're looking for.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.